By the year 2000, 360 million households around the world were connected to the World Wide Web. With everyday access to the internet in so many homes, it suddenly became a lot easier to meet and communicate with complete strangers via internet forums, chat rooms, and dating sites. As such, of course, this led to a whole new dimension in home invasion horror. After all, how much do you really know about the person who's asking for your home address or is inviting you to their remote house in the woods?
Help! 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 Help!
In 2005, director David Slade made a brutal, uncomfortable, and unflinching cat and mouse horror movie about a 14-year-old girl who is invited to the home of a 32-year-old man who she met on the internet. But in this cat and mouse horror, who is the cat and who is the mouse?
Get the fuck off of me! Please untie me and let me go! Please!
A decade later, the internet had come a long way, but similar scenarios were still playing out in interesting and innovative ways in horror movies. In 2014, Mark Duplass and Patrick Bryce made a found footage film about a videographer who responds to an online ad and arranges to meet a stranger for a job that pays $1,000 per day.
I'm assuming you're Aaron.
Yeah, I'm Aaron. Nice to meet you.
Joseph.
But when he arrives at this stranger's remote house in the woods, he gets a little more than he bargained for.
Why do you look scared? Don't be scared. It'll all be over soon.
Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of home invasion, and we discuss David Slade's Hard Candy and Patrick Bryce's Creep.
Oh my god. Oh my god. This is gonna be a good day.
Oh my god, it's gonna be a great day. Hello and welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Munter, and as ever, I am your host. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre, one subgenre at a time. And we are currently in the middle of our 9th season exploring the creepiest subgenre of all, home invasion movies. This is part 22, and in this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we're going to be looking at the dangers of meeting strangers on the internet and inviting them into your home. We're going to be talking about Hard Candy from 2005 and Creep from 2014. Both of these discussions will be spoilerific, and I will also say minor spoiler alert for Creep 2. We do talk a little bit about some plot details in Creep 2 during our Creep discussion. All of these films are absolutely banging. I would recommend checking all of them out. So joining me to discuss these brilliant movies, I've got a long-time friend of this podcast. He was last here in our vampire series discussing Buffy and Angel with me, but he's a big old internet nerd, so I had to have him back for this episode. Let's just hope he's home. Here we go. Alex Ayling, hello.
Hi, welcome, come in.
Oh, thank you. What a beautiful home you've got. It's so lovely to see you in the flesh, Alex, you know, having just talked on chat rooms together for so long.
So we're like podcast host 219. You're shorter than I thought you'd be in real life.
Do you know, we joke, but actually we kind of did meet each other online, right? In a way, because I can't remember. I can't remember exactly how now. I think I got in touch with you because you listened to the podcast.
We met on Twitter.
R.I.P. And I was like, this guy seems cool and smart. And I was like, do you want to come on? And then we arranged to meet in a safe space in central London, didn't we? When we met for the first time? In public.
Yeah, we went for a coffee in a public place. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think you slid into my DMs. I think you just replied. I think everyone was, it was all very consensual and public, and
exactly.
We were all happy about it.
And it's so true, actually, because obviously we're going to talk about this as we go throughout this discussion, but that actually, I've had such positive results from meeting people online and meeting up with them, because Louise Blaine, the first time we ever podcasted together, where we spoke about The Shining, that was the first time we had ever met. We arranged to meet on Twitter, and she had no idea who the fuck I was, and she had come into London in person, And I was like, come and sit in this little cubby hole in the BFI with me and record. And, and it was the same with quite a lot of guests in the early days of this podcast. So, we love the internet.
We do, but I feel like we're already going to get into it very early. I feel like your and my experience of the internet is probably very different from Louise's experience of the internet. And
Absolutely.
So you two agreeing to meet up is much more risk on her part than it is on your part, I would say. Not that there's any risk with meeting you.
No, exactly. Well, let's hope not. But no, exactly. No, you're absolutely right. And all of this we will get into. But let me just rewind for a second, Alex, and start off by asking you about home invasion movies. What? Yeah, there's that noise. There's that noise that people make when they hear home invasion. What do you think of home invasion films, Alex?
I'm really pleased that you're doing it as a season of the podcast because it means I don't have to watch some of these films that I've been putting off for a long time. And now I'm just like, I can just listen to you talk about them. It's like with your Extreme season. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Thanks for taking the bullet for me. I find it to be one of the most affecting subgenres. And it's probably one of the only things left that can trigger me. So like you're a nice sensitivity viewer for me. So sometimes I'll be like, what's this film like? And you're like, well, there's some child peril. Maybe you don't want to watch this one. And so there's some films on your list that I probably won't watch now. Maybe I would have watched before I became a dad, but there's extra jeopardy emotionally for me with these things now. So I think there's it's interesting piquancy, I guess, to this subgenre. And it's, like I say, it's some of the most affecting stuff. When it's done well, it's some of the most affecting stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And you're right. I mean, so many people have talked about how it's kind of scary and triggering. There's a whole nother layer to it, I think, if you're a parent actually thinking about it, because so much of the home we associate with families, with children. This is where you're supposed to be safe with animals, pets, whatever it might be. And so often home invasion is one of the few subgenres where even the pets and the children aren't safe, right? So it is a scary subgenre.
Exactly. And to flip the theme already while we've been talking about it, there's for me there's a kind of undercurrent of, what would you call it? Not toxic masculinity, but I guess maybe a bit. It's that kind of expectation as the man of the house that you need to be defender in chief. Like my name is Alexander, right? It's defender of man in Greek. That's what it means.
Yeah.
It is. And that is the burden that you take on as the quote unquote head of the household. You're the man, whatever else. And so if something were to happen, the expectation is that I'm the one who's got the baseball bat by the side of the bed and I'm going to confront the person and run around. And then you become responsible for more people in your family unit, and that puts you more in the firing line. And we've talked before about if we were in a slasher movie, I would die in the first reel because I'm the guy who's going to go and explore the strange noise outside, and then you're going to find my head in a spike towards the end. That's me.
100%. Same here. Like I am, and I'm going to talk about this a lot over the upcoming few weeks actually, because there have been a lot of films in this kind of era of home invasion where I've kind of gone, I probably would have done exactly what these characters would have done and just let the person in, or not found a way to defend myself or my home or whatever it might be, and I would have been killed with my own manners or politeness, most likely.
Do you think that's a peculiarly English thing? British thing?
I think there's a little bit of Englishness about it, and I guess just personality types too, really. Like, despite having all of these conversations and watching all of these films, I still am very what's the word? Is it kind of ignorant, I suppose? Like, I'm still just very kind of nonchalant and confident about the fact that it would never happen to me.
That, my friend, is called privilege.
Privilege. That's the word I was thinking of. Yeah. And probably wrongly so, though, right? Because one of the things that we learn through watching a lot of home invasion movies is that it could happen to anyone at any time, right? Like, it's random, really, in terms of whether or not you might get a break-in or whatever.
It is, but I think the thing that is triggering about it is that it goes deep, it goes emotional, and you make it, because it's your personal space, you assume that the motives of the people doing the invading are personal as well.
Yeah.
Almost never Almost never. Like, all it is that probably really desperate people who just want an extra few quid to fund their addiction, or because they've had a bad lot in life, they're unlucky, and so, there's, you're going to ask me if I've ever been broken into, and the answer is no. And the reason is because, like, I always aim to be at least the second slowest gazelle, right? So you don't have to have all the locks on the doors and the Fort Knox security. You just have to be a bit better than some of your neighbours.
Well, that's a very good point.
Who lives near me. Yeah. But you just need to not be the last gazelle in the pack, because that's the one that's getting picked off.
Yeah.
And so you just need to take enough precaution and be safe enough.
Yeah, totally fair. And I think there is, what I've had fun with this season is kind of playing with what is the traditional home invasion. So you got the movies like Funny Games and The Strangers, and the movies we think of as like nasty home invasions, but there's stuff like the two movies we're going to talk about, or movies that I'm going to be covering in the next few weeks, like The Invitation, or whatever it might be, or even Parasite. Like there are so many interesting movies with interesting stuff to explore when you get a bunch of characters together in a house. Whether that be the main character's house or the villain's house or whatever it might be, right? Like, lock people up in this kind of pot boiler situation and see what happens. That works very well for horror, I feel like, right?
Definitely. And individually, like, the times when I'm more scared are more likely when I'm in a temporary home away from home. So I'm quite into the resurgence of the Airbnb horror subgenre.
Yes.
That's a fun area for me, and that feels like because you're creating a home for a weekend, right? But then you don't know anything about anybody else, and especially for me, that means normally I live in London, right? So especially for me, that normally means if I'm in an Airbnb, I'm in somewhere rural, probably like in a cottage somewhere. That's terrifying, right? I like being surrounded by people everywhere. I find that comforting. Being in the emptiness where you don't know the approaches, you don't know the sounds, the roof is going to make different noises. There are animals I've not seen for a while, like doing different things. Like,
yes,
all of that is much scarier than being at home in North London, in like probably one of the crime hotspots of the country, to be fair. But
I'm
not saying it's logical.
I totally get you. Did you watch Barbarian last year? Because that's the ultimate Airbnb horror. Did you watch that one?
I loved it, and I was so pleased that I managed to... You were there when we were in a screening and the trailer came on, and I had to like dive under the row.
Yes, that's right. Trying to avoid any spoilers.
So literally, I'd seen the first few seconds of the trailer several times and then nothing else. And so I watched it clean, and I really loved it. Really enjoyed it.
So good, right? So good. So we, as well as home invasion, we are talking about the perils of the internet, really, in this episode too, right? Who you meet on the internet, who you might invite back to your home, or whose home you might walk into. And they're fascinating, I think, both films in different ways to discuss this. And actually, we've talked about the internet and horror quite a lot together. The first time you ever came on the podcast, we talked about Slender Man and kind of viral folk horror. We've talked about My Little Eye, the kind of live streaming horror movie. And I hope you weren't offended when I messaged you about this, Alex, because I was like, Alex, I've got this double bill about weirdos on the internet. I think you'd be perfect for this episode.
Noted internet weirdo, Alex Ayling.
Exactly, yeah. No offense.
Subject matter expert.
It's more like clever computer nerd, Alex Ayling, all right? It's what I mean with love.
I'll be your Willow Rosenberg.
Yes.
Sure.
Exactly. But it got me thinking, right? I think there is something kind of interesting to note that, when it comes to home invasion, I suppose, the dawn of the internet and everything that's changed in our culture over the last 20 years, whether it's social media, whether it's online dating, chat rooms, forums, general kind of horror communities in the way that we've built, it does mean that there is this greater risk of you, whether it's a hookup or whatever, giving your home address out to essentially a complete stranger, right? Or a complete stranger inviting you round their home. And there must have been a huge increase in that over the last 10 or 20 years compared to anything that came before that, just by the very nature of how we all now communicate, how we meet people, how we make friends, relationships, partners, no matter what. It starts in this kind of weird, amorphous, kind of ambiguous, conceptual, virtual world, right? Before then, you enter somebody's home and it suddenly becomes very real. And that's what these two movies are kind of really dealing with, aren't they?
Yeah, we'll probably talk a bit about it later, but I think that was one of the most fascinating things for me, was looking at a film from 2005 and a film from 2014, and then being here in the year of our Lord 2023, going back 10 years and then going back 20 years, the difference between the two films and the difference between those films and now is pretty stark, right? And I think that, I'm so fascinated especially to watch Hard Candy again. I think it's a really interesting reappraisal of where the world was at in so many different ways compared to where we are now.
Right, and this is an interesting area to get into, first of all, I think, isn't it? Let's rewind back to 2005, where everything involving the internet was very, very different, right?
Yeah.
Right before social media became a thing, right? It was around 2005, 2006 that Facebook... I guess we had MySpace and stuff like that at this point.
Bebo.
But it's very much kind of playing on the idea of kind of the chat rooms, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah.
In that regard, the early 2000s internet world, which is kind of fun.
And it depends on, how nerdy you were, how into it you were, and the rules of engagement on the internet were still being created.
Yes.
And we're probably still living with the consequence of those now. The internet had been around for decades by this point, right? It was invented in the 70s or something for scientists to talk to each other. But this is, I guess, the mass market explosion, and people were finding grotty little corners to meet each other. I was thinking about this the other day, being in a chat room. Like when did you ever? Were you young enough for chat rooms?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I used to go on the MSN chat, like before MSN Messenger, when there was just MSN chat. I remember going on that in the early days of the internet, and I would have only been about 13. It's probably not a good idea that I was on those, actually, thinking about it. But again, it was kind of like the Wild West, the internet in the early 2000s, late 90s, wasn't it? Really?
No one knew what it was, and anybody who was in a position to make rules about it didn't understand it. I mean, the people who are in position to make rules about it now still don't understand it. But I still remember ASL. That's the first thing anybody sent you on a chat room.
Yes.
Remember age, sex, location.
Age, sex, location. Oh my God. Yeah, that's so interesting.
I just think about all of that personal information you're giving out immediately.
Exactly, right? This is the danger.
Or not, or just lying about it.
Yeah, exactly. And all of that information could be completely false, of course.
Yeah.
So there is so much interesting territory here to explore. So let's get into it. We're going to start by talking about David Slade's Hard Candy from 2005.
What the fuck are you doing?
That's kind of been my question, Jeff. What the fuck are you doing? Living in a house filled with pictures of half-naked teenage girls. Oh, none of whom you've ever done it with.
Help! Help! Help!
There's really no point in me taking any risks, Jeff. Technically, I could let you scream your fucking brains out and no one is gonna hear you. Yeah, I waited till today because Mr. Coughlin is at work and the Carrascos, well, they're vacationing in Santa Barbara. Still, I can't have some pedestrian just happening by as you're screaming, so shut up! Or next time, it's gonna be bleach, okay?
So, Haley, a 14-year-old girl, and Jeff, a 32-year-old photographer and potential serial killer, flirt together in an online chat room and decide to meet in person. Jeff is courting the underage Haley and lures her back to his house, but ends up getting more than he bargained for when the tables are turned as Haley employs increasingly intense methods of torture to try and get a confession out of him.
Yes. Oh my God. There's so much to discuss, but let me start off by asking you, Alex, what do you think of this movie? And what's your history with it?
So my history of it, I remember going to see this film at the cinema when it came out. There was a lot of buzz around it.
Yeah.
There was a lot of buzz. And looking back on it now, like, I was so surprised to see the cast list. And I was like, oh, this person was in it. Oh,
unbelievable.
Patrick Wilson. I don't remember that. Sandra Oh's in it.
Yeah. Considering there are basically only 3 people in it, it's like, holy shit, all 3 of these people are incredible, right? They're all incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, like, Elliot Page runs away with it.
Unbelievable.
It's his movie.
Yeah.
But I'd forgotten that it was Patrick Wilson.
Yeah.
And then Sandra Oh doing her like post-sideways Grey's Anatomy Imperial era is about to begin, like popping in for a day.
Yes.
I was just like, oh, okay, sure. So yeah, so I remember watching it at the cinema when it came out, and really, really enjoying it. Well, enjoying it, really being very kind of like it was very much my kind of film around then. Like it had an aesthetic. It was like a little bit subversive. It was a good one to talk about with your pals. And then I remember thinking about it and talking about it with people after that, but I don't think I've watched it since then. Mm-hmm. I don't remember watching it. Like I bought it on DVD. So I could watch it again because I don't think it's streaming anywhere.
No.
I couldn't find it easily on streaming. So I just thought I'll get the DVD in just in case there's any fun extras or whatever. But yeah, I hadn't watched it again since then. So that was a really interesting experience. Remembering like obviously the big set pieces, but then forgetting all of the little nuances and all of the other bits and pieces, and watching it through a 2023 lens, I think was also a bit of a revelation, I have to say.
I love this film. I think it's phenomenal. I saw it at the cinema too in 2005. It really fucked me up when I first watched it. Like there are some scenes of, because it's funny, isn't it? Because I wouldn't actually lump this in with the kind of torture porn movies of the 2000s, but there is some really disturbing sort of torture, although it's not really torture in this movie, that is I still found this week as hard to watch as I did nearly 20 years ago watching it. It's so powerful, I think, this movie.
It's very effective.
So effective. Yeah. And while there are elements of it that are of their time, obviously, like I think this is the problem when you make any movie about the internet or technology, right, as well. And there are other things about it that maybe have kind of seem a little bit dated now, but also there are other things about it where I'm like, wow, this story feels so relevant now, and also was probably quite ahead of its time in 2005. It didn't really feel like there were many other movies doing what this film was doing and saying what it was saying as well. So yeah, I think it's a cracker of a film. It's so good.
Yeah, I think it deserves a bit of a... Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think academically, once again, what film did we talk about this? My Little Eye, was it we talked about, where it was it was a similar kind of like, you know, this film is a very interesting snapshot in a moment of time that tells you something about culture. You know, this was made in 2005, so we were a couple of years into the war in Iraq, and I guess it was written and shot in 2004. And so, you know, torture is the thing. That's what everybody is talking about. And do the ends justify the means? I think it's such a great idea to come up with this, because the producer had this idea. He read a story about some kind of Japanese schoolgirls, I think, who were doing this similar sort of thing, like luring potential sexual predators and then doing stuff to them. And then he commissioned a playwright to write this film. And then I think the genius move is then making it a treatise on do the ends justify the means, and vigilantism and what is right. And I think that's the thing that carries it through, that is still super relevant today. But some of the stuff I found on this viewing less affecting And you know, I mean, we're skipping right through all of the stuff now, but like one of the things I thought was the film really wants you to question whether he is guilty or innocent. The film really, really wants you to do that. But for me, it is red flag after red flag immediately. There was no question in my mind. Any of this behavior is completely inappropriate. And I thought that was really interesting that in 2005, because I remember the discourse.
Yes.
The discourse was like, oh, but you know, was he innocent or guilty? No one knows. He's denying it. And this is obviously not like believe women, right? That's the
no.
That was not a thing 20 years ago. And I thought that was a really interesting, that was the lens that I sort of ended up looking at through the 2023 lens.
I agree with you. I think that's the if there's anything that is an issue with this film, and actually for me it doesn't affect my enjoyment of the film, but I think you're right. I think it's impossible now. I think the whole conceit feels like it doesn't work anymore watching it in 2023, because whether this guy is sexually assaulting and murdering women or not, he still met a 14-year-old girl on a chat room and has invited her back to his house to you know, whatever, hang out.
And is serving her drinks.
Yeah, like, it's like, oh, no, this guy is not a good guy, no matter what actually is the deal with him, right? So yeah, I think you're right. I think in some ways that's so interesting, isn't it? That I don't remember that being such an obvious thing when I watched it. I mean, I would have only been 18 as well at the time of watching it in 2005, but I don't remember. I remember thinking, is he a good guy or is he a bad guy, right? And it's like, oh no, he's clearly a bad guy. It's just to what extent,
right? And that's an interesting lens, right? And that is still relevant. Like, does he deserve what he gets depending on what he did?
Yeah,
like that's interesting. But the film doesn't want you to ask that question. The film wants you to ask, is he innocent?
Absolutely.
And that sort of tells you where everything was back then.
It does. But also, there is more to it than that as well. And I think there is something really interesting. I love films that do make me feel a bit uncomfortable and are not really, not just morality tales, I suppose. And I love the way in which the film, time and time again, almost makes you want to sympathize with this very, very bad man, right? Like, regardless, whether you know from the start that he is a monster, the film is kind of, the story is told as a way that it's like, he is the prisoner, he's the victim in this particular situation, right? Yeah. And you go, oh my God, who am I? Who are my kind of alliances with? Who do I feel for in this situation? You know, and I love the way that I think it pulls off that balancing act really well throughout, you know, that kind of tightrope.
And he's very charming, he's good looking, you know, all of those things are a bit subversive. Like, I guess if you're thinking about the depiction of here we go. If you're thinking about the depiction of paedophiles in cinema, it's Todd Haynes' Happiness. You know, it's like schlubby men masturbating behind a curtain.
Yeah.
Or it's the same year, actually, I thought was interesting, was Sin City. Do you remember Sin City?
Yeah. And the yellow bloke.
The yellow guy.
Yeah.
The yellow guy, literally grotesque, like yellow guy with a massive big head. You know, those are the depictions of monsters. And so, you know, fair play to this film for showing you that monsters can look like everyday folks. Like, that's still, you know, progressive. I get progressive is a weird choice of word, but you know, that was a choice. That was a good choice.
It was a choice, and it was an unusual one, I think, for the time. And it does feel different to me. It feels more mature than a movie like Saw or Hostel or those other kind of home invasion / torture porn movies that we were getting at the time. Like, I do think this movie feels like it has a point, it has a topic that it's exploring in a really interesting way.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's similar in, I guess, that for Hostel, you know, you are putting the people who are being tortured are avatars for the audience. You know, the people who are most likely to be watching that film are the people who are being tortured. You know, Hard Candy was not made for 14-year-old girls to watch. It was made for 32-year-old men to watch, right? Or you know, 20 men in their 20s. Like, that's probably the prime cinema-going audience for this kind of thing. And that centers them in the narrative in an interesting way. And I kind of like, I give the film credit, and it's hard not to look back on it, but I kind of wish it had pushed a little bit harder as well, and made people feel complicit. Like that's how this could have turned its screws up to a 5-star for me, is like make you feel complicit with him somehow.
Well, I think, yes.
Or identifying your own behaviour, or I don't know.
Well, I think it comes close to that with what we just said, with Patrick Wilson being generally a nice, charming, likeable guy on screen, and in a way that he's not your out-and-out typical on-screen pedophilic monster, right? But you're right.
No.
Like, I think there is also, again, especially watching it now from the very beginning, it's like, oh, why would we be rooting for this guy? But which is true.
Hayley is playing a game with him the entire time, and she's playing the pick me girl. You know, the manic pixie dream girl, Zooey Deschanel kind of vibe, right? And she's tapping into that deliberately because she knows it's going to be his Achilles heel.
Yes.
Like I love all the stuff about Goldfrapp and all of that kind of stuff.
So
like
good.
All of the cultural nods and the ways that she's got under his skin. Like I think I really thought that was good.
Well, what an incredible performance, right? Like, and actually, like we should just kind of say, you know, going forward, obviously Elliot Page played Hayley, and the character is a female in Hard Candy. So when we talk about the character of Hayley, we will use she, her pronouns. But when we talk about the actor, we'll go by Elliot Page, obviously, as he identifies now as he, him, right? But I think we'll have to differentiate between the character of Hayley and the actor of Elliot Page.
Please don't think I'm misgendering him when I'm talking about Hayley, the character.
Exactly. But yeah, this is an incredible pair of performances, right? You mentioned that there is, you know, this film was written almost as like a play, right? And it feels a bit like a play.
It totally does.
And it's, you know, it's basically a single location and two people in a house. So it rests a lot on them, right? But what do you think of these two central performances?
I mean, they're both amazing. Like, they both go to just really amazing, unselfish places.
Yeah.
I thought, like, Patrick Wilson, I know he was a stage actor and he'd done some amazing work on Broadway and all of that. But this was kind of, I guess, one of his first leading roles on film.
Yeah.
And I was listening to the director commentary, and the director was saying he was just not worried at all about the way he looked, about what he was doing. Like, it is such a physical performance.
It's so raw,
if you go
isn't
back,
it? Yeah.
If you go back and look at the scene where he's tied up just before the big scene.
Yeah.
His hands are purple.
Yes.
That isn't makeup.
Jesus.
That was really happening. You know, the only kind of, they put some makeup around after he's had the noose around his neck, they put some makeup on for that to look like some kind of rope burn and whatever else. But all of the hand stuff, like, he passed out at one point when he's like trying to move that dining room table over.
Oh my God.
Just like an incredible performance from him. And then Elliot Page, my God.
Oh.
You know, before he'd been in X-Men, before Juno.
Yes, this was pre-Juno,
you know, all of these things.
Right? Unbelievable.
This is pre-Juno. All of these things that we're going to see him be on the front of all of these magazine covers and be an object of everybody's interest and all of that. You know, there could have been a path that led to the manic pixie dream girl, Zooey Deschanel kind of vibe. That was the risk. But again, it's such a nuanced performance. And what's clever about it is it's a performance of a performance.
Yes.
As well.
Yes.
And he's playing this girl who is trying to be liked and trying to be coquettish, but has planned everything to within an inch. Mm-hmm. You know, Hayley knows that the neighbors are away. Hayley knows exactly everybody's movements. She knows everybody's phone numbers. And there's like one moment in the film where you see the real Hayley, where she's like chatting to someone on the phone.
Yeah.
And that's the only chink that you see. And everything else is a performance.
It's incredible, right? And who is Hayley really? Is her name even Hayley, right? I think that this is what we love,
I'm
right,
sure
about
not.
this character, is that she's like this vengeful spirit almost. It's almost like she's not even real, right? She's got no identity. She flits in and out of of men's lives, punishing them, basically, it seems like, from what we gauge from this. But yeah, it's a phenomenal performance from Elliot Page, because there are moments when it's like big and emotional and raw, with those moments when they're physically fighting each other and screaming at each other, and then there are other times when, like, clearly Hayley is a character that is like, she's so under control, and like you say, the kind of the lies and the performances within the performances,
and there's even a performance within a performance within a performance where she's trying to make him believe that she's upset,
yes,
when really she's not, but also she's not even that person. Like, it's, and to be able to do all of that sometimes with just a look or one word,
and it's so uncomfortable. This movie is like, oh, I love it. I love a good uncomfortable horror movie, right? It's one of my favorite things. It's
That's
icky.
the word you wrote to me. It's so icky.
I genuinely think there is, like, this film is kind of excruciating, particularly in its first like 30 minutes when they are just like flirting with each other and stuff. It's unbearable to watch. It's gross and it's really uncomfortable. But again, Elliot Page pulls off this brilliant thing where, like, Hayley is clearly super young, but also super mature for her age, and she's very, very, very smart as well. But so she's got this way where, like, you know, there's this kind of way about her where, like, a lecherous man would be like, oh, I would have had no idea that she was 14. She acted much older or whatever. And it's really playing on all of those kind of, those horrible kind of things, isn't it, I think?
But she makes it very clear. She says exactly how old she is several times.
Yeah,
you know?
Over and over again. I know.
She is not
so
letting you get away with that, you know?
You just don't really look like the kind of guy who has to meet girls over the internet.
Well, I think it's better to meet people online first sometimes. You get to know what they're like inside. You work as a photographer, you find out real quick. People's faces lie.
Does my face lie?
I look at those eyes and I see a girl who reads Zadie Smith, who listens to John Mayer and Coldplay, who loves Monty Python episodes, and who desperately, madly, deeply wants, needs, longs for more chocolate.
Excellent judge of character.
I'm fascinated. Like, where did she come from? What was she doing before? What led her down this path? You know, what happened to her? You know, you never find out anything.
No. And so there is no right answer to this, but do you have a kind of anything in your head, like in your head canon, you know, like, is she the friend of the girl that was murdered? Like, is she,
that's the closest,
does she know her? Yeah.
That's the closest I've got. And you find out right in the last, like, 60 seconds of the film that this isn't even the first time she's done this.
Right. Love
you
that.
know, and
love that.
And that's such a good turn. I mean, there's a few good turns in this film, but that one towards the end where you're just like, oh, suddenly the whole rest of the movie makes sense now. She has been honing her craft. She has been working up to this. Maybe this is the pinnacle. Maybe not. Maybe she's off to go and avenge somebody else.
Yes.
So I don't know whether she was a friend. Like, actually, my headcanon isn't that she was a friend of the person that Jeff and Aaron killed.
Mm-hmm.
But I think she did have a friend.
Yeah.
Or a sister or something like that. And then she went and found those people, and then she's been working through the chat rooms, finding men,
finding the wrong uns,
predating on the predators. Preying on the predators, yeah.
I love it, and you know, and it really preys on that, what would be Patrick Wilson's character's worst nightmare. Like, he's powerless. He's got this girl rooting around through all of his private stuff, you know, like, and the film feels like such an invasion, doesn't it? Like, it just, we're in this house. And you just kind of want to burst out from it. Like, there's that one moment when she goes up on the roof and we see Sandra Oh for a second. And it's like, oh, thank God we're out of that house for a second, because it's so
you can almost, like, breathe fresh air.
Yeah.
The colours in this film.
Oh, my God.
Everything about it. I hate this interior decor style. So pretentious.
It's so pretentious.
It's perfect for the character. It's perfect for the character. His own photographs on the wall. There's no, like, everything's just a little bit off. that the bedroom is like that sort of flesh color. Well, it's horrible. It's just not a relaxing, cozy place.
But I tell you what, it makes the film really pop off the screen, doesn't it, as well? Because again, when I compare it in my head to the movies that were coming out at this time with that kind of dingy, greeny, brown look, right? This movie is such a breath of fresh air in comparison. Like that amazing, that incredibly pretentious house with like the stark white and the red. Like, I always picture in my head when I think of Hard Candy, I think of bright white and I think of bright red, right? And those two colors like bumping up against each other. That's kind of the poster and the artwork and everything. But also this house has that. It has like the red walls, the yellow walls, the white, clean lines. But again, like you say, everything is kind of pretentious and quite jarring as well. Yes.
And the cinematography, the lighting, the colorization, everything that they did, like the lens flares, when just really well used. And you can tell this is, David Slade is a music video director.
Yes.
And you can see where he honed his craft on telling stories in 3.5 minutes for a pop song.
Absolutely.
And using every trick in the arsenal, every bit of lighting, every bit of color, everything means something. The sound, the soundtrack. We should talk about the fact that there's virtually no music in this film.
There basically is none, is there? And again, I think that's what makes the film so unbelievably uncomfortable. I think
weirdly oppressive.
It's so oppressive. It's so oppressive. I think, when we finally burst into a bit of music towards the end and the camera work starts going a bit more mental and a bit more 2000s-y, it's almost like then you feel a bit safer. It feels a bit less oppressive than the first 80 minutes of this film, which is just like stuck in this room with these people with no music and no easy way out, But yeah, I love it. And it never feels... It is a play, but it never feels uncinematic in that regard, right? And David Slade is just amazing at that. He also directed 30 Days of Night, which we did in our vampire series last year, which again, like that amazing Alaska set vampire film, which is all like white snow offset against redder than red blood from the vampires again. So he's got that real kind of stark color palette and visual style, I think, which really works for this movie. Is there anything else you want to mention about the house itself as well? Because again, the geography of the space is always so important in home invasion movies. How do you think David Slade does kind of present us with this space that we spend pretty much the entirety of the film in?
Well, it's interesting that it's, a secluded location. It's a well-to-do property. I think considering how oppressive and, tied down you feel, it is a very open plan house. There are no walls. There's the bedroom.
No.
But apart from that, and I guess they go to the bathroom. Yeah, there's the bathroom at one point is a room and the bedroom, but everything else is just one big room.
Yes.
Or there's like that little studio bit as well, but they barely spend any time in there. And so I think that's really fascinating as well. It's like it's a big open space and there's clear lines everywhere. And so, when there's the inevitable chase scene, you have to leave the house and then come back into the house again through a different door in order to create a chase scene. And you've got the roof as well. But yeah, the geography in this one is minimalist in the same way that the story is minimalist and everything is sort of pared back to exactly what it needs to be.
It's the opposite to like the big old dark house, isn't it? It's like there's no dark shadows, there's no hidden nooks and crannies.
There's no crawl spaces, there's no people in the walls.
And I guess this is also the point of the conceit, right? Is that this man has nothing to hide. Like everything is on there. Show. Yeah. And Hayley really struggles to find anything incriminating about him for so much of the movie, right? She goes through every drawer, every room, every cupboard, and can't find anything, but it's almost the house is too perfect, right? And this is the thing, and this is something that Hayley points out. It's like, you don't even have regular porn. Where's your porn stash? Another 2005 thing, right? Like, where's your physical porn stash?
Yes.
Like, well, that's not a thing anymore. But yeah, I think that's the other fun thing about it, right? Is that this house is supposed to be oh, he's just like an open book, this guy.
Yeah.
Like everything is on display, there's absolutely nothing, but it's so clean, it's almost like worryingly clean, isn't it? That's the thing.
Mm-hmm. Like what, he's not going to have one of those everything drawers.
No.
It's with keys, a couple of batteries,
yeah.
Some old instruction manuals.
Yes.
Like he's not going to have one of those. Everything is pristine. That's really fascinating. It's only on a rewatch when you know where the film is going and you know what her ultimate objective is. Like, her ultimate objective is not to hurt him. She doesn't want to leave a mark on him. Like, she wants to... She doesn't even want anyone to know that she's been there. That's the thing. And then you see it through a completely different lens when you see the escalation and everything that's happening and all the searching of everything and everything else. Is like, it's all just looking for evidence, not because she is going to hand that evidence in. She is going to use that evidence as leverage to make him do the thing that he does at the end of the film.
Yeah, it's so good.
That's what it's all about.
Well, she keeps giving him choices too, in a way, right? And he can't handle the thought that any of this stuff could get out about him. I think he would rather end up dead at the end, wouldn't he? I think. And there is this element of again, this is another thing that kind of puts you in an uncomfortable place, because there is this element of shame that Patrick Wilson's character feels all the way through the film, right? Like, even before we know what we know about him, there is this real feeling of embarrassment and shame. And that's something, regardless of all the really dark stuff that he's done, I feel like that's something that anyone can relate to. Like, he says that to her, doesn't he, at one point? He's like, you sneak into someone's house and start going through all of their shit, you're going to find things that are going to embarrass them. And I think in that regard, again, the film really, in a really clever, uncomfortable way, does kind of put you in this position that he's in, which is like, oh, that would be really embarrassing. What if somebody went through all of my drawers and found something embarrassing,
Oh, yeah, and he's brought down by his own ego.
Yeah.
Like, that is ultimately the thing. She's clever and everything else, but her plan only works if he is brought down by that shame. If she can make that shame big enough that it eclipses his ego, and he would rather not live than live with the fact of everybody knowing what he did. That's the only thing that she has.
Yeah.
And the physicality between the two actors as well.
Yeah.
Like, Elliot's so much smaller than Patrick in this, and they use that physicality so well.
Patrick Wilson, I've met Patrick Wilson, and he is a very large man. He's very broad. Like, I remember shaking his hand, and his hand just like engulfed mine. Like, he is quite a big, imposing, physically, he's quite a big person. And you're right, like, they use that in a really fun way, because Elliot Page is a very petite person, isn't he? Really, I think, in comparison. So yeah, it's really fascinating with that. So then, of course, like, the horror really does kick in when we get to this moment where, Patrick Wilson is drugged, he's tied to a chair, and this is kind of it. It's like, holy shit, this is now, we're in it till the end, with Patrick Wilson tied to a chair, being tortured, essentially. How effective do you find the horror itself, the torture and everything that this film puts us through from this point onwards?
The good thing about it is it's still, like, it's very domestic. It's not like Hostel, where it's like, here's a big torture room with all the torture drills and all of the rusty whatever. It's like, no, it's a bit of cling film. It's some bleach spray. These are the things that are being employed in the torture. And actually, like, those really are only ever used to focus him, to focus Jeff on the task in hand, which is to elicit a confession. Like, the real torture that's happening is psychological, and they're sort of playing this cat and mouse game, and like, he never really gets a chink in her armor, like maybe a tiny bit once or twice, but they're not playing on the same field. The only advantage he has over Haley is the physicality. Like, that's all he has. And she's really good at knots. She's really good. She's really good at knots. Yeah. She's thought it through. And so she is using the bleach or everything else with the suggestion of torture, leading up to, I guess, what is the big set piece. And I remember the castration scene as being the denouement. Like that's what it was all working up to. And I remember there being sort of talk, beforehand of it, of what else. But quite a lot happens after that, actually, more than I remembered.
Yeah.
Because I think like the film, like where do you go from there?
Oh my god, that's kind of bang in the middle or sort of latter half middle of the film.
Yeah, it's like half an hour left or something after that.
But my god, that is a powerful scene. Like, obviously it's not a real castration, but it doesn't matter. Even on rewatch, I physically had to turn away at a couple of points. Like, even though we're not seeing anything, like he doesn't show, David Slade doesn't show us anything. We're just looking at Elliot Page. We're looking at Haley most of the time, and occasionally we get this close-up of Patrick Wilson's face kind of blank and in shock as this is happening to him, and we get these kind of sound effects. But it's when Haley says things like, right, here comes the first one, and she's like yanking it, and like all of that is like unbearable to me. It's unbelievable.
For sure.
So good.
Okay, what should I do first? Your right or left testicle? Why don't we just say right, okay? All right, now I just have to give it one little slice to free it up, and then, snip. All right, now you're gonna feel a tug, because I really gotta get this tight, all right? So just bear with me. Gary. Okay, halfway through, over the hump.
I remember like watching it at the cinema, and I remember there's one shot because she's filming it supposedly, and there's like there's a monitor in the background, and I remembered it so clearly in my head that like all this stuff that you saw like briefly on the monitor, and then watching it again, I was like, it's completely blurry. You can't see anything. There's a suggestion of movement for like 4 frames, but it's so powerful that suggestion that you don't see anything, but it's like kind of like skin colored and red, and there's a bit of movement. You're like, what's happening?
It's honestly, it is just like everything about it. Even the long build up to it, where Haley puts the ice pack on him, and then she just leaves it on there for a good 10 minutes while she's like talking through what she's going to do to him and everything. And it's like, and then everything even afterwards. It's funny and it's over the top and it's absurd, but it's so gross. Like putting the quote unquote testicles down the garbage dispenser in the, like hearing the plug go, and like, I don't know. I just like, I feel every moment of that sequence.
And they've already left his body at this point. There's no putting them back. And still it's like crossing the legs time.
And here's a brilliant, again, uncomfortable, powerful thing where you do, or I do, feel a kind of sense of relief when he checks and nothing has been removed, right? That Patrick Wilson finally gets left alone. He manages to get out of his ropes and he checks. First thing he does is check himself down there, and he says, I'm all there. And there's this like look of relief and this smile.
Yeah.
And I think, oh, thank fucking God he's all there. But actually, no, this man does deserve to be castrated. But yeah, it's like, again, a brilliantly uncomfortable, really well executed sequence. I think the whole thing, so good.
Really, really, really effective. Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
So tense. And again, why? Like, why do we care?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. I guess it's just relatable. Like everyone's had a knee to the groin. It's that fingernail thing, right? It's just very relatable pain.
Yeah, and again, like Patrick Wilson's performance too. This reminds me a lot of when I chatted to Becky Dark about Misery. There's a Misery vibe to this film, right? This two-hander in a house, and this man that's being tortured. And we talked about that with Misery too, about how brilliant both performances are. And of course, Kathy Bates gives one of the best performances ever, I think, to which she was like showered with awards and praise. But I also actually think James Caan in that movie is incredible. Like he just has to lie there and react, right? He, and like Becky points out that the depiction of pain in his face throughout is so powerful. And it's the same with Patrick Wilson. Like in that torture scene, how he rides that wave of going from like kind of like not believing it to, oh my God, it's actually happening, to like the screaming, the pleading, to then the kind of silence and resignation and like shock. And like, I don't know, he goes through every emotion in that sequence and I kind of believe all of it, it's so good.
Get the fuck off of me!
There's so much pain, there's so much desperation, there's so much shame all wrapped up in this character and what he's going through, I think. And of course, we get sort of glimpses of his backstory too. We get this idea that there is this kind of shame or something in his past. He talks about this ex-girlfriend called Janelle, who I think was also young, but he was a bit younger, right? And maybe she broke his heart. And, you know, what do you think is the reason for that backstory? Are they trying to, I don't know, kind of quote unquote explain or give him a motive as to why he does what he does? Or is it just giving a bit of colour to his character? Like, how do you find that, the kind of backstory of Jeff in this movie?
I don't think it gives us a motive. And frankly, I don't want one. Like, I think his motive is a gradual escalation in the pursuit of, you know, getting off. And every time you do something, you have to then go a little bit further the next time, a little bit further. So maybe it started with, you know, some inappropriateness in a photography studio. You know, maybe it was just photographs to begin with, and maybe there was something after that, and then that escalated to something else, and then that wasn't enough, and so that escalated to something else.
Yeah, well, actually, it might have started with like, oh god, this story as well about his like little cousin or whatever who sat on his lap naked when he was a child. Like, again, I'm like, it's one of the most uncomfortable things.
Why did you make me watch two movies with uncomfortable bath scenes?
Honestly,
one imagined and one envisioned.
It's one of the really sort of underrated things about home invasion, actually, that I'm coming to realize is that it's you know, the kind of the discomfort, the social discomfort and awkwardness of good home invasion movies is really important, I think. And those stories of him as a kid in this.
But that story is red flag after red flag.
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. Yeah.
And that's the reason for me that this film, I guess now, isn't quite up there as a masterpiece, because like it is asking you to empathize with someone who is clearly a monster. Like, there are zero redeeming features. Through a 2023 lens, there are zero redeeming features. Like, he's handsome, so what? Like, I think that's the like, if you're going to ask me if it aged well, that's the thing for me. I think that has made it age not so well. Like,
well, yeah, I sort of agree with you. I know what you mean, but I'm also in two minds about it, because I think there is also something quite interesting and transgressive about the fact that the film does invite us to empathize with a monster. And the film puts you, the viewer, in a very uncomfortable position. As we keep saying, this movie is icky and it's uncomfortable, but not icky and uncomfortable in a way that feels, I don't know, jarring. It feels all very deliberate. Like, I think David Slade and the writers of this film want us to think about that. They want us to think about what people like Jeff do deserve, right? And should we feel sorry for them? Should we just wish death upon them? You know, should we not? Like, all of these questions make me more interested, but also more uncomfortable in this deeply uncomfortable horror film, you know, because there are times when I do feel sorry for Jeff in this movie. There are times when I empathise with him, I guess, you know?
But that's because you're empathetic to another human being.
Yes, exactly.
So, like a virtue that he has not shown to other people. And I think, I mean, yes, there is I'm not throwing the whole film out by any stretch. I still think it's brilliant. But making it about the vigilantism of it and is torture appropriate enough, I think sort of lets him off the hook a little bit.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. And of course, when he gets out, this is where we really get the reveal, because he could go and immediately call the police at that point, and he doesn't, and instead he grabs a knife and then he flips
sort of
out.
Accepts who he is.
Yes.
He's like, okay, if this is what it's going to be, this is who I am. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, and it's brutal.
And at that point, he becomes the antagonist for real. And at that point, the film is like, no. If you were sympathizing this so far, now you know he's the bad guy.
Exactly. And that's why I think I know this film's heart is in the right place, right? It doesn't give him an easy out. It doesn't give us, the audience, an easy out, right? It's going, no. This man is a monster. However you felt about him throughout this whole movie, he is a monster, right? So then we get that incredible, very 2000s final act, right? Yeah, it's suddenly like the camera's all over the place and the music's really loud and everything's really like...
Sort of the industrial techno kind of music scene.
But I absolutely love the final showdown on the roof.
Yes.
Because again, this like quiet moment when the two of them talk to each other, and a really disturbing thing when he finally admits that it was him working with this other guy, Aaron. They killed this other girl.
He just watched, Mike.
Well, he just watched. Oh my God. And then, of course, we get that brilliant line from Haley where she says, Aaron said the exact same thing. Oh, so good.
He hasn't said Aaron's name.
No.
He says, oh, it's another guy. It was another guy I just watched. And she says, that's what Aaron said just before he killed himself.
Oh, it's so good.
She has outplayed him on every level because, like, physically, he could overpower her at this point, throw her off the roof, do whatever, like at that point. But she's called Janelle, who is now outside. And how are you going to explain that?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh,
she's outplayed him brilliantly.
What a film.
Really, and that it is a very satisfying kind of showdown at the end because it gives you the kind of the moment. And it gives you the opportunity to feel like sympathy for him again, where she's like, if you kill yourself, I won't tell anyone, I'll run away, blah, blah, blah. And then he does it and she goes, or not. And so even if at that point you had thought like, oh, well, at least his legacy will be safe. No, she's gonna drag him.
God, it's a nasty, angry film, isn't it? And I love it. This is something, again, this is just so of this era. You know, I talked about this with Rosie Fletcher about the new French Extremity movies at the time, all feeling like they had this anger, like they just wanted to scream about something. And this movie feels like that too. Like it feels like a really angry movie in a great way. You know?
Yeah, it's interesting that though, isn't it? Because it was a male producer, a male director, a male writer, and maybe that's why the point of view is about the torture and the centering of Jeff's character and does he deserve it or not, and not about like what has Haley been through and who is she and all of that. Like I think there's a scene in the film where Haley is reciting an email that she sent to Janelle that's like classic 14-year-old girl, and like she goes into that she's like the Valley Girl speak and all of that kind of thing, but actually they wrote a believable teenager. That was impressive, like an actual believable teenager, not what everybody thinks a teenager should sound like.
Exactly.
But this film was made by a whole load of men, right?
Right. And of course there is this horrible kind of irony, I guess, that it's since come out very recently. Elliot Page has talked about this in his kind of autobiography, and there are articles about it, that he was sexually assaulted at the time of making this film on two separate occasions by two separate people. Were they both members of the crew from this movie as well? I can't remember.
I only think one of them was a crew member on this film. I think the other one was maybe not related to this movie, right. But one was a male crew member who propositioned him after the rap party, and they went back to his flat, and you know, it was one of those kind of imbalances of power. Like, Elliot was only 17 at this point, you know, not even like an adult, really. Even in this film, and I think that's what's interesting to me, and that's what tells me where the heart of this film came from, was from what you know, centering of the male experience. What was it? What would it be like if you were accused of this? What would it, like, how would it feel? All of that. And it turns out he is guilty, sure, but that seems like maybe, like, I don't know anything about it. I haven't read Page Boy, which is the Elliot's autobiography in which he revealed this stuff. I've only read the reports of it, but you can see maybe there was a toxicity or something that was prevalent, you know, probably not just in this film, actually, to be fair, like in all films, like
everywhere,
you know,
everywhere.
Miramax,
that was the
whole
point.
Thing.
Exactly. And that was
rotten
why,
to the core.
That was why, you know, we got what we got in the 2010s, right? But yeah, it was clearly right. And it's unbelievable, isn't it? That this, it's like, did they see the film that they were working on, these crew members? It's like, it's unbelievable, isn't it? It's unbelievable.
But I think they probably, that's my point, is I think they probably did see the film and they thought the film was about a man being tortured, because that is effectively what the film is about.
Yeah, you're right. And I guess different people will read this movie in different ways. I read it a very certain way, but I guess that's not how everyone at the time or even now might potentially read it. Yeah.
I've just thought about all the comments you're going to get. So let me say it. Let me just say it now. Yes, I'm a beta cuck. Yes, I should watch some more Andrew Tate videos to learn what a real man is like. Like, yeah, sure. Like, whatever you're going to say to me, like, just don't bother.
Two lefty, loosey-goosey liberal cucks talking about these movies. Full disclaimer.
Exactly.
That's what you get, I'm afraid. But there you go. So that's Hard Candy. And you touched upon this already, but I am going to ask you again, how does the film hold up for you? Kind of it's 18 years old now, right? Apart from the stuff about, downloads folder and keeping physical porn media in the flat, how do you think the film has aged?
I think I love any films about the internet, as you well know. Especially now, you can call these like period pieces, right? It's a vintage. The internet years are fast. They're like dog years, right? It goes super fast. And so for that, I think it's a really important film. I think it's really well made. I think there are some stunning performances. It's well worth watching again. I think it has lost a little bit of its power from being out of context of, the zeitgeist of torture at the time. And probably as well because of what has come after it, being more extreme and being different. And, this is not a feminist movie, right? So and there are interesting things to say about that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it's still a great movie.
I agree. I agree with everything you just said, really. And I do think it's it's just such a watchable thriller and a really, really deeply uncomfortable, icky one. It's
under 90 minutes.
Under 90 minutes. That is the real dream, isn't it? And speaking of short, sweet, under 90-minute, uncomfortable, brilliant horror movies, let's move on to the next film we're going to talk about. This is Patrick Brice and Mark Duplass's Creep from 2014.
Hi! Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you.
I'm assuming you're Aaron.
Yeah, I'm Aaron. Nice to meet you.
Joseph. Oh my God. Oh my God. This is gonna be a good day.
So the reason I've hired you is because I have terminal brain cancer. And I want you to film me to make a video diary for my unborn son.
You ready for this?
Okay. Joseph.
This is called an adventure. We don't know exactly where we're going, but I have a feeling. When you follow those feelings, great things can happen. Don't ever forget that.
Joseph?
There was about 2 seconds there where it looked like you wanted to kill me.
Joseph? I think I'm gonna head back. You see my keys?
One drink, okay?
Bottoms up.
Aaron is an easily startled videographer who is hired for the day by Joseph, an intense and eccentric man with terminal cancer. Joseph wants Aaron to film him up in the remote woods so that his unborn son can know what he's like after he's died. All the footage that we see is being shot by the characters, but as Aaron and Joseph spend the day together, Joseph's behavior becomes more and more disturbing until he dons a wolf mask, calls himself Peach Fuzz, and stalks Aaron. But even though Aaron eventually escapes, Joseph is not done with him yet.
Yes. What on earth did you think of this film, Alex? Did you see this movie when it first came out?
So I don't think I saw it immediately that it came out. This was like the definition of a sleeper, I think, because it was made by... Is this a Blumhouse as well, this one? No.
It is.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, this is Blumhouse.
It's an early doors, like Netflix original, not a Netflix original, but it was a Netflix exclusive. And it's
like straight to streaming.
Yeah. And it snuck out. And in 2014, you didn't have that many. And this one for me went a little bit under the radar. And it's in that kind of like mumble gore kind of vibe. Like the whole thing is basically completely improvised. Aaron is played by Patrick Brice, who was also the director, and Mark Duplass plays Joseph, and they both like credited as co-writers on it. But I think basically the whole thing was a few beats that they sort of mapped out and then completely improvised. And as such, and again, it's a cast of like 3 people. There's 3 speaking roles maybe, and one is only ever heard over the phone. So it's sort of like snuck out. And I remember somebody at work like recommending it to me. Shout out to Lee. Thanks, Lee, for the recommendation.
Thanks, Lee.
And watching it and absolutely loving it. Like instantly being like, this is my kind of vibe. And so I've got a lot of time for this film.
It's so my vibe, this film. Again, like anyone who knows me and knows my
This
tastes,
is why we're friends.
It's so, just put some weirdos in a house together and let me see what happens, right? I absolutely love this film. And but it's so weird. Every time I watch it, I'm like, what a weird character that they've created. What a weird performance. Like, it's fascinating, I think. It's like you can't look away, but it's so odd. Mark Duplass, of course, like you said, you know, mumblecore, like he was famous for this kind of movement of mumblecore that kind of kicked off in the early 2000s. People like he and Greta Gerwig and other people like that were making these kind of kooky, naturalist, you know, mumbly dramas, right? Kind of quite hip kind of dramas, Sundancey kind of films, right? And it was just so interesting to see him carry that style into a found footage horror film, right, as well. It's so interesting. But I love this movie too. I like even rewatching it again this week, and I had to double bill it with Creep 2 as well. Like as soon as I finished watching Creep, I'm like, I kind of need to go straight onto the sequel, you know. But I love it. I really love it. I think it does all of those kind of icky things that Hard Candy does, but it's maybe a little bit more palatable than Hard Candy, isn't it?
I think so, because they are both flawed characters. And you're sort of like, it's clearer as well, like where the crazy is. Like,
yes,
Aaron makes some bad decisions, but he's not a bad person. And Joseph is quite obviously a wrong 'un from the beginning. And you can see that. And so I think it's it's an easier watch, I would say. Yeah. Like I still think it's very effective. It's very effective scares. Like I can do without one more of those, like jumping out from behind a window,
screaming jump scares,
screaming jump scares. Like I'd sort of done with those.
Yes,
but the creeping dread, you know, and the build up to those, I think is handled very well.
Yeah, agreed. I actually don't, you know, this movie is more palatable than Hard Candy. I actually don't know if it's as good as Hard Candy. Only in that, like you say, it does occasionally resort to cheap found footage jump scares, like someone just screaming at the camera every now and then after a long period of quiet, right? But having said that, there is so much else in this movie which is so creepy. I think the pacing of it and the way that it takes its time, and it spends this time on the characters. For me, the best horror in this movie comes from Mark Duplass's character, not from the jump scares.
And it's a found footage film, which is a real found footage film. And the whole way through, I've forgotten how it ended. And I was like, is this a found footage film?
Right.
Because like the thing that I hate, as we've talked about many times with found footage films,
yes.
Who edited this together?
Yes. Why are we watching this footage?
Who has compiled this? Why are we watching it? Who did all of this? You know, and there are some great found footage films that break the rules, but this one doesn't. And you don't find out until the very end. Right.
I was going to say, does it all add up for you ultimately? Because there are moments, right? There are moments, and I'm not talking about the stuff, you know, the reveal at the end and everything is one thing, but there's a lot of the, what's the main character? Not Joseph, but what's the cameraman called in this movie? I forgot. Is it Aaron?
Aaron.
It's Aaron. It's very confusing because there was an Aaron in Hard Candy too. But Aaron, Aaron filming himself in his house while he's receiving packages or while he's lying in bed. There's a few moments of that where I'm like, is that a little bit forced, you know, that he's just like filming himself monologuing on the sofa while these bits are happening?
Yeah, I get that. And they sort of like address that, I guess, in the second film where the videographer is also a documentary maker.
Yes.
But I know people who are professional camera operator, videographers, and they fucking never stop filming.
No,
they can't help
absolutely.
themselves. They're always pointing a camera at something.
Well, I think it's really interesting. I think we've talked about this together before, Alex, but I think, like you said, 2005 was a very particular time in the internet and online culture. 2014 was. And now we're in a very different place again. And actually what's interesting now is that we can very easily justify everything being caught on camera. And there are lots of like live stream horror movies. There's Dashcam. There's what's the one with the guy in the haunted house where all the shit's happening to him? Deadstream. Yeah.
How could you forget Deadstream?
I know.
You mentioned it like 20 times on your podcast.
I know, fuck's sake, Deadstream, yeah. But yeah, like those movies where actually found footage has kind of gone back the other way, where it's actually so justified because people do live their life on camera and they're streaming stuff, right? But 2014 was a little bit of an in-between, wasn't it? It was kind of still slightly old school, just before get that? Everything.
When did we get that Blair Witch remake where there was a drone? And I'm like, no.
I hated that. Yeah, that was about... No. That was about 2015, I think, as well, 2016. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like it's before the kind of TikTok, live stream era, I think, this movie, isn't
But also,
it?
because of the conceit, like they know that about found footage as well, and so they give it to you at the end, and they're like, here is the reason why. It is a collection of videos. And actually... we can talk about them at the end, or we can talk about them now, it's up to you, but like there's alternate endings to this film that wouldn't have allowed it to be a found footage film.
Interesting. I did not know that. Well, maybe we'll come back to that in a bit, but that's really interesting. But also it is a little bit passé at this point, even found footage, right? Like found footage kind of really boomed in the late 2000s with Paranormal Activity 2007, and then everything that came in the wake of that, Wreck and all of those movies. And by about 2012, 2013, people were sort of sick of found footage, I think, as well. So actually, it was kind of interesting that this weird little movie came to streaming that was still doing the found footage thing. But I'm all for a found footage film when it's done well. It's one of my favorite kind of subgenres. It's one of my favorite formats when it's done well, So
I agree. And it works for this as well because it allows the director to be in it and to participate and for the improvisation. And that's when found footage again, going back to Blair Witch and everything, but that's where you capture those naturalistic performances and you are improvising and it feels that it's taken away a level of artifice, and so you are allowing the performances to be less showy and less actory as a result.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the mumblecore of it all.
That's why it works, I think, because again, like I've droned on about this so much, but I think the point of the burden of found footage is that it has to be believable. Like you do really have to believe that what you're seeing is quote unquote real. Like you have to believe the performances. Like there is an extra layer of naturalism that you have to have, right, with found footage. And I think these two, with their mumblecore ways, really pull it off, actually. Even though he's a very larger than life character, Joseph, actually, as well, isn't he? But it works.
Oh, but that feels believable.
Yeah.
He's like, he's just one of those people that he is larger than life. But I mean, I walked past 3 people like that on my commute today, outside Farringdon Station. I was like, oh, there's one. He's a larger than life character.
Totally. Yeah. And actually, looping it in with the kind of Netflix of it all from the 2010s, he is also reminiscent of the sorts of characters that we've seen on so many kind of true crime docs or just documentaries or reality shows generally. I think of like the Tiger King or I don't know, the Jinx or whatever, but these kind of people that you're like, I can't believe these people are real. I can't believe these people exist, and the way they behave in front of a camera. And that's Joseph to a T, I think, isn't it?
You ready? Okay. All right. Now, let's get those tootsies wet. You ready? Get those tootsies. Oh, tickles, doesn't it? Oh, stinkeroo. Oh.
So let's talk about Joseph as a character. What on earth do you make of him? Because I think it's so deeply uncomfortable spending time with this man for so many reasons. Even before we know that he is a killer, there is something so unnerving and weird about him. I mean, like, we start off with that kind of awkward conversation about the fact that he's dying of cancer and he wants to make a video for his unborn child. Then immediately he gets naked and we get to the bathtub, tubby time, right? Where he's kind of like playing with his invisible baby in the bath naked. It's so deliberately making us uncomfortable immediately.
So these are more beige flags than red flags in this one. And I think that's what makes it more interesting, is that you're like, he's a bit weird, but is he dangerous? Like, there's a whole right up until the very end, there's like, is he dangerous, or is he just troubled? You know, is he just ill? You know, and this film does that much better, I guess, in making you guess all the way through. But he is not, you know, he's not a usual personality type, and you don't really find out anything about his motives, because you can't trust anything he said.
No.
I don't believe any single one of his mad stories.
No.
I don't know anything about any of what he says. And that's sort of borne out by, I know we're not going to talk about the sequel much, but like that's borne out by the sequel, where he's changed his name.
Yes.
and he's a different person, and he's taken on this kind of personality type, and you're like, well, he's a chameleon. Is he in it for the chase?
Yeah.
Is he in it to like meet people? Like, what is he getting out of it?
Right.
You know,
that is the thing that really confuses me. It doesn't give you an easy answer to this question, right?
No.
Which is that, what the hell is his deal? Like, what does he actually want? Does he, like you said, is he getting off on deceiving people, making them feel uncomfortable, and then killing them, and making his little weird sordid videos collection of all of his victims? Like, I think ultimately that's what it is, right? But there also, you get this feeling that there is genuinely a bit of, he loves the company, right? He's also maybe a bit of a lonely guy in the middle of nowhere that actually wants friends too.
Because the thing about the videos is like, I was about to do a Black Mirror spoiler, but it's not.
Oh, it's fine. Spoiler alert for Black Mirror.
It's not a kind of Lock Henry situation, right? It's not It's not a collection of videotapes of depravity and torture and you know, dismemberments and sexual gratification. Like, none of that is on the films. There is one moment probably in all of these home movies at the end that is kind of the grace note, and you sort of see in the very last scene of the film where you've got Joseph, I'm doing inverted commas now, Joseph speaking to camera saying like, the first time I watched it, and it gets better every time. But I can imagine he isn't just watching that bit, he's watching the whole 90 minutes
the
or whatever
foreplay.
That's been edited up to that thing just for that one moment there. And it's, you know, that's what makes it different, as well as like, it's not, you know, it's going to get grubby and sordid, but it's not like he's sitting there masturbating over a video of this whole time. Like, it's something else. Like, maybe there's a sexual element, but I don't know if it's all tied up in some other kind of gratification. It's really hard to figure out. And I think that, like, I don't see that as a negative. I think that's powerful. Like, he's brilliant. He's sort of unknowable in that way.
Yeah, I think this is where, you know, this is where we get to the kind of wanky film studies chat about like being, you know, voyeurism in film, right? And why do we enjoy watching horror? Why do we enjoy watching people suffer and die? You know, I talked about this a lot with Funny Games, but it goes all the way back to movies like Peeping Tom, and this idea of kind of people looking through a camera lens, and this idea that, this guy, like you said, he's kind of getting off on it, albeit sexually or whatever, on creating not just a kind of snuff video of murdering somebody, but of telling a whole story, right? Of creating his own narrative, his own film, where he creates a character for himself that ends in grisly murder. But it's like he's enjoying making this really fucked up, uncomfortable film, and we're enjoying watching it with him, as well, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, is the satisfaction coming from how far he can push his quote-unquote victim, his protagonist, his videographer? Is that where the satisfaction is coming from? You know, and being able to relive that and seeing what he can get away with, seeing how far he can push it before, you know, there's an issue. There's a problem, like it gets called out on it. Or I
think there is that too, isn't there? There is this it's like he's experimenting. He's like he wants to push people and see how far he can push them, doesn't he, as well? And yeah, I think all of that's really fascinating because, again, it's like pushing us, the audience. It's like, how much of this weird shit can you handle? And, like, it starts off with the weird bath, which is weird, right? That's a very weird, uncomfortable scene to watch. And then it gets weirder and weirder, like his story about his wife who was watching animal porn, and then he like snuck into the house and, in his words, raped his wife, like
wearing the wolf mask.
Yeah, it's like, what is any of that? No, and of course none of that was true, because I think that Angela was his sister and not his wife, right? When the videographer called her. Maybe.
Yeah, but she's quite nonchalant about it. She's like, yeah, you should probably leave. Not like, by the way, my brother's a serial killer, get out. She's like, he's at it again. Just try and leave, would you?
It is.
It made me wonder, like, is she complicit? Does she know? Does she really know what's going on?
Yes.
Or is she just...
Because it's another thing that makes you think, like you said, is this man actually dangerous, or is he just a bit troubled? Like the fact that, like you say, his sister apparently is pretty nonchalant about it and is like, oh, he's like this, you should just leave. But not in a way that's like, get the fuck out of there, you're going to die. It's like, okay, maybe he's just a troubled, unwell man, but
just warn a guy,
Yeah, exactly, right? And also, do you get any kind of, do you think there is a sexual attraction? Like, do you think Joseph, is there anything homoerotic going on in this movie?
Those are two different questions, I think. I think there is a homoeroticism, but I wonder whether that is whether that's a kind of misplaced intimacy. Like, I don't see it that Joseph wants to have sex with Erin.
No.
I think he's searching for intimacy, and maybe he's just trying on lots of different things, seeing what will work, seeing what will get him closer. Like, it's, is it getting naked in the bath, or is it sharing a whiskey? Is it pancakes? Is it talking about food? Like, is it going for a hike in the woods? There's lots of different things that he's trying to use to try and get close to this guy and to be let in. But there are the things that he's saying are kind of off. When Erin goes like paddling in the pool and he's like, look at those tootsies, it's just like there's a sort of edge to it that I can see why it feels like there's a kind of sexual edge, but I don't get that impression of him as being like a homosexual or a closeted homosexual or any of that, or being a sexual predator. Like, it doesn't feel like the end goal is a sexual one.
No. Completely agree with you. And of course, again, not to keep going into the sequel too much, but I think that's even fleshed out in the second one, that he's essentially almost asexual, I think. But I think there is this feeling of, I think he's pushing it deliberately, right? Again, it goes back to that idea of, it's almost like because of his kind of sociopathy or psychopathy, like he is incapable of feeling these feelings, and it's almost like nothing makes him uncomfortable, and he is enjoying seeing what makes other human beings uncomfortable. That's what it feels like to me. And it's like, let's try and be a bit, a bit too overly familiar with him at times, or let's try and tell him stories that are going to really freak him out, or
he's totally toying with him, isn't he? And he's saying like, oh, I'm telling him a story, and then within 10 minutes he's saying, by the way, that story I told you was a lie. Here's another story. And, you know, when I did this is what was really happening. And actually, when you arrived and it didn't look like I was there, I was filming you from elsewhere. I was taking pictures of you from somewhere else. Like, it was the sort of layers of deceit already in there. And he's needling at those things until Erin just sort of flips and he's like, no, we're done. Thanks. Where are my car keys? I'm going now.
It's so good. And actually, another thing we should say about this film, because, there are not many laughs to be had in Hard Candy, but this movie is funny, right? Like this, I think this movie intentionally, like it's a comedy. It's an uncomfortable comedy, right? As much as it is a horror film. I think this movie, which I love, it pulls off that balance really well. I think
it's not a horror comedy. It's a horror that has some funny bits in it, which I think is the right way to go, because that allows you a little moment of respite to then have, you know, that after the laugh, you can then get the kind of uncomfortable night vision vibe, you know, which it's a cliche, but I love it. I'm sorry, I'm a basic person.
I love the uncomfortable night vision. Love the moments where we get a bit of, in your words, Alex, frame analysis horror, where you see him kind of lingering out the window, like, you know, outside the window or whatever. Like, oh yeah, we're all suckers for that stuff, right? It's so good. Yeah. The horror is brilliant as well in this movie. Do you ever get frustrated by Aaron's kind of you know, the fact that he stays maybe longer than he should, etc., etc.? Like, do you feel like he makes any stupid moves that you wouldn't have done yourself? Or do you kind of buy into the way that he kind of reacts?
Again, you're asking compound questions. Does he make any stupid moves is part of the first. Second, that you wouldn't have done yourself. Because I would say, yes, he makes some stupid moves that, yes, I probably would have made myself.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's the interesting trend that you're getting to, I think, at this point in the series of politeness being a weapon that can be wielded against you. And not just politeness, but societal norms, expectations, all of that good stuff. And I think that is compounded when, like, Aaron knows that Joseph is, like, not all there. And so he feels sort of sympathetic and empathetic. And there's a part at the end where he's like, I mean, he could kill me, but maybe he just needs a friend, you know? Mm-hmm. And so he goes to meet him. And I guess that's what makes him the ultimate mark. Or in Joseph's words, like, that's why you're the best person in the world, or whatever he says at the end.
Yeah.
It's because you're the best. That's why you're the best person in the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that.
No, I mean, I completely agree with you. Like, yes, he does some stupid things. Yes, I would have done the exact same thing, I think, probably, you know? Like, it's a really hard thing. And again, like, there's this last decade has just been amazing for movies like this, but everything from like Mother to The Invitation to Speak No Evil, but these movies of kind of like human politeness that leads to like absolute bloodshed and horror, and this is such a great example of it, I think, you know, like social norms and how ridiculous they can be at times in a way.
Yeah, you know? You know, being a nice person is going to get you killed.
Yes.
Like, that's the nihilistic part of it, right?
Hello, my name is Peach Fuzz. I might look like I eat you up, but I'm as friendly as a rabbit. And I'd make a very good friend.
We haven't really talked about Peach Fuzz.
We've got to talk about Peach Fuzz.
This iconic mask, this iconic wolf mask.
Yeah.
That is initially revealed in one of those annoying, shouty, screamy jump scares.
Oh my god!
But there's something about when Joseph puts on the mask, his physicality changes, and it's almost as though like the real, like Peach Fuzz is the real him. I think the movie was originally called Peach Fuzz.
It was. That's right. Yeah.
And then they changed it to Creep, but that the performance of when he's wearing the mask, and he doesn't do your kind of stereotypical, he doesn't become the Shape, he doesn't become Michael Myers.
No.
He doesn't do the stalky thing. It's its own thing. Like, he becomes still.
Yeah.
And he becomes like terrifying as a result. And that mask is like, the first time he puts it on, it's so uncanny where he puts it on and then he's like, it's a friendly wolf. And he does this like stupid dance and song. And you're like, this is not a nursery rhyme I would have liked as a kid to get me to sleep. This is not going to make me feel good.
It's horrendous. It is like, again, like the whole movie, that mask is absurd and silly and also really fucking creepy at the same time, isn't it? I think, like, again, it's a perfect balance where you go, what the fuck am I looking at when you first see that mask? And there is like there's a sort of animal imagery throughout, isn't there? Like, it's almost like he wants to be a wolf or an animal. Like, obviously he talks about the kind of wolf sex with his wife, quote unquote wife, that he has. But like, yeah, it's almost like he wants to be, or he thinks of himself as like a wolf in the woods or something.
I haven't written it down, but he has a little monologue about how wolves just don't know how to love and they kill people because they love them so much. And there's this whole kind of mythology that he's created for himself.
Yeah. And there's an almost fairy tale element to this guy, that this big bad wolf that lives out in the woods, right? As well, in a way.
Totally.
Like he's a wolf. He is a wolf in sheep's clothing, almost, as this kind of like overly friendly but slightly odd man that he appears to be, until he becomes really menacing and dangerous. So yeah, like all of that is kind of fascinating about him, isn't it? I think,
and it's a good segue into the other kind of thing that I want to talk about in terms of the form of this film in its found footageness, is like the scary, like it's really creeping around the house is really freaky, and I did not like it.
So good.
And so then he sort of comes downstairs, and Peach Fuzz is just standing by the door, like stock still. And then there's the implication of a fight and a couple of dull thuds, and then there's a hard jump cut to Joseph like dragging some bin bags up a slope.
Yes.
And I was like, hang on.
He's dead.
There's half an hour left. Has he killed him? Like, what's the rest of the movie going to be?
Yeah.
And then the film does a turn where Aaron reveals that he's still alive, and he's like, yeah, so then I just got this video, which is really weird.
Yeah.
And it turns out that Joseph has been making videos and sending them to him. And you know, we as an audience are not a party to this way that the film is going to turn and this edit that's going to happen. And that happens again at the end. And I just think it was a really clever way to maintain the found footage truth and the authenticity of it being a found footage film, whilst also giving you a surprise and a bit of a release. And I just thought it was clever.
I agree. And it feels like one of those moments again when you can like breathe a sigh of relief, actually, when we're just like away from that house for a while in that sort of third act of the film, right? Even though he is in properly bad mortal danger at this point, because he's receiving packages to his house, and then we get the really creepy video footage of him sleeping at night and all of that stuff, you know, while Joseph's like creeping into his house.
But that's brilliant, because we've seen him like filming himself at night, and we've seen him get up and he's thought he's heard a noise, and the next time we see that same shot composition, he's asleep, and then the camera starts moving. And you're like, fuck. Like when the camera starts to move is really effective. Mm-hmm. And then he just a little like cuts off a lock of hair. And yeah, that's all.
Yes.
Oh,
lock of hair.
And it all just gets a bit weird.
It's, incredible. And then, so finally, what do you think of that ending? Again, it's sort of horrific, but there's something quite funny about it, right? The really, really long take from the distance of Aaron sitting on the bench and then Joseph coming up behind him and just walloping him in the head. Yeah. What did you make of that whole sequence?
So I'll talk about there are two alternate endings that I think are really interesting. And I haven't quite figured out like which ending came first, but what I do know is that one of them, so the ending that we see, the tree that's by the bench it looks like it's winter, like there's no leaves on the tree. And then one of the alternate endings, the tree is in full bloom, all the leaves. And so they must have been shot like probably like 4 or 6 months apart. But so the ending that we get is Joseph sends Aaron a message saying like, I just want to meet, and then I want to explain myself. And if you don't like it, then we can like call it quits and we'll never see each other again. And Aaron, for some reason, decides to say yes to this, turns up, sits on a bench, and then Joseph slowly comes up behind him, puts the Peach Fuzz mask on, and then plants a big axe in his head. And then we get the ending and the little epilogue where we find out that he's got a whole cupboard full of videotapes with lots of different names and lots of different things on them. And so he's been doing this for a while. The alternate endings, there's one ending where it cuts before you see him do anything with the axe. And so there's a much more ambiguity around what has happened and where they're going to get. Like he gets the axe out and he sort of like doesn't know what to do with it. And then he sort of lifts it up and then there's a cut. And so you don't see what happens. It cuts to credits. Yeah. But the other alternate ending is he comes up and then he's sort of doesn't really know what to do. And then he walks around to the front of the bench and sits down next to him. And then they just sort of sit there for a while staring out at the lake and then it cuts to credits.
Huh.
So
interesting.
Implying that they're now friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
And who knows what that means.
Wow. But I guess
that ending leaves open the possibility that he's just unwell and he's not a murderer.
Absolutely.
Because you don't see him kill anyone in that.
No, he wouldn't have actually killed a single person. That's really interesting. But like you say, slightly negates the point of the found footage, really, which is why we've just watched everything.
So that can't be.
Yeah.
So then why would Aaron have then cut it together? Maybe as a kind of like, oh, here's this weird guy that I met and now we're friends. Like,
exactly.
It's not that compelling.
It doesn't quite work, does it? And actually, that's why the ending, it does work so well. And actually, I think they do really interesting things to flesh that out in the second one as well. So we should briefly talk about the second one. But just to wrap up on this first one, did it still hold up for you watching it again for this discussion? Like, is it still a movie you'd recommend to people?
Absolutely. 100%. Again, it's under 90 minutes. What could go wrong? It's a really good... And also, I'd say this is a much easier watch than Hard Candy. Like, you don't have to be... Because it's improvised and everything else, and there isn't... it's not a play. You don't have to listen to every word. You don't have to be fully invested in the whole thing. Like, it's a much... easier. If you're going to watch them both, watch Hard Candy first, then Creep. That's what I did, and that's it's a better way of doing it. But yeah, it holds up. I feel like it's underseen still. I don't know why. Like I don't know. People don't seem to talk about it that much.
I think it is, and it's a strange film, and it's a hard one to categorize because there's relatively little horror in it.
Yeah.
Especially compared to Hard Candy, which is hardcore. And because it's kind of funny and quirky and a bit kooky and mumblecore as well. I wonder if that sort of puts people off. I don't know, but I love it too. I think it's a really fun, again, just super watchable, right? Just super watchable. Like I enjoy just sinking into this for 80 minutes and just spending time with these two characters.
Exactly. Exactly that. And as weird as they are, they're fun to spend time with. Like it's not ever so awkward that it becomes cringe.
Yeah.
It's never like, oh no, like I can't watch it. It's always fun.
No, absolutely. It really rides that line where you can't tear your eyes away, I think, right? All right, well, I want to quickly ask you about the sequel in a bit as well. We'll talk very, very briefly about Creep 2 before we wrap up. But first of all, let's head on over to this week's Wild About Horror, because psychoanalyst and cinephile Mary Wild has some thoughts on Patrick Brice's Creep.
Hey Mike, Mary Wild here, with some thoughts on Patrick Brice's found footage psychological horror film, Creep, from a story by Brice and Mark Duplass, who both star in the film. Brice portrays a struggling videographer assigned to record an eccentric client played by Duplass. The story was inspired by character-driven dramas, including Misery and Fatal Attraction, as well as a number of baffling Craigslist experiences had over the years. Aaron accepts a job to travel to a remote mountain cabin in Crestline, where he meets his client, Joseph. Joseph explains that he has an inoperable brain tumor and is expected to die before his pregnant wife Angela gives birth, so he wishes to have Aaron record a video diary for his unborn child Buddy, just like the protagonist of the film My Life. Throughout the day, Joseph acts oddly and makes Aaron anxious. In an especially dramatic moment, Joseph confesses that he raped his wife. As an increasingly concerned Aaron is hindered from departing the cabin by being unable to locate his car keys, he intercepts a phone call from Angela, who discloses that she's actually Joseph's sister and urges Aaron to escape. Of the creative process for his character Joseph, Duplass explained, quote, "We were interested in the psychological profile of this very strange person. We were interested in how you meet people and don't quite understand what's up, but you start to get signs. For us, that was intense eye contact, lack of personal space, oversharing, maybe a little too much love here and there. But there's something wrong with both of these guys, deeply. It's like, who's the creep in this scenario?" End quote. This remark by Duplass exposes the misdirection at the heart of the film. Creep is set up on the surface to make us think that Aaron is normal and Joseph is the weirdo. But by taking a closer look, it's possible to see these characters as different features of the same mind, the conscious personality and primordial instincts, respectively, and the interaction between the two. Freud's prominent 1923 paper, The Ego and the Id, is a study of the human psyche that helps to shed light on creep. In the text, Freud develops a line of reasoning as a groundwork for explaining normal and abnormal psychological conditions resulting from powerful internal tensions. He says that the ego, caught between the id and the superego, finds itself simultaneously engaged in conflict by repressed thoughts in the id and relegated to an inferior position by the superego. And at the same time, the interplay between the love instinct and the death drive can manifest itself at any level of the psyche. All concepts in the ego and the id are built on the presumed existence of conscious and unconscious thoughts. For Freud, this division of mental life is the fundamental premise on which psychoanalysis is based. It's not a simple case of unconsciousness and consciousness mapping directly onto the id and the ego one-to-one. Rather, Freud argues that the supposedly conscious ego can be shown to possess unconscious thoughts when it unknowingly resists parts of itself. Thus, a third kind of unconscious thought seems to be necessary, a process that is neither repressed nor latent, but which is nonetheless an integral part of the ego, the act of repression. It is conceptualized that the ego merges into the id, the dynamic compared to that of a rider and a horse. The ego must control the id like the rider, but at times, the rider is forced to guide the horse where it wants to go. Likewise, the ego must, at times, conform to the desires of the id. Let's explore how this manifests in the film. Creep is a very cleverly designed film that topographically stages the ego and id on several levels. The opening shot is Aaron driving his car, leaving the flatlands and heading out towards the mountaintop. The ascending movement makes me think of the wish to reach the tip of the so-called iceberg model of the mind, linked with the Freudian hydraulic system in which the ego, also known as the conscious personality, is thought to be all that there is. But the ego is only the visible portion that covers up the enormous unknown structure of the iceberg below the surface, the unconscious, which governs most of our thoughts and behaviors. We hear Aaron say he's not sure who he's meeting. In this cute little town with the cute little lake, the ego operates to project an appealing image of itself, everything neatly arranged, looking cute. But despite wanting to appear conflict-free, there's a troubling mystery at the center of the conscious personality that betrays its picture-perfect aspirations. Reaching his destination, Aaron must go up a steep driveway and then climb a lot of stairs to arrive at the yellow front door at the top of a very high porch. Soon after, Joseph says, "I never get used to those stairs." The altitude of the cabin's location is not incidental. It reinforces the lofty ambitions of the ego to level up and give the impression of rising above pesky internal tensions. One of the most striking aspects of Creep is the numerous jump scares, a film technique intended to frighten the audience by surprising them with a sudden change in image or event, usually co-occurring with a loud, jarring sound. It's one of the most basic building blocks of horror movies to startle the viewer at a point where the soundtrack is quiet and the viewer is not expecting anything alarming to happen. Joseph abruptly jumps into the frame out of nowhere and screams. That he does this repeatedly signals simmering activity below the threshold of awareness, a chaotic force that threatens to spill over. Joseph claims that his illness caused him to get dizzy spells and unusual cognitive misfirings. This seems to be code for a disruption at the level of mental functioning, but I think it serves a mirror purpose reflecting Aaron's own emotional crisis. Joseph tells Aaron that his job is to keep the camera rolling, walk with him, and document him how he is. He says he doesn't need Aaron to glorify him or make him seem cool or anything other than what he is, so that his son Buddy can see him for the man he was. The message here is that Aaron operating the camera is able to access unfiltered information and perceive a truthful, warts and all picture despite the ego's best efforts to smooth over unflattering complexities from the unconscious. Joseph gives Aaron $1,000 and says, "This is no longer a business transaction, okay? This is a partnership, a journey into the heart. I'm really glad it's you coming with me." The interaction here reads like a pact in which the ego finally decides to look at its inner workings, no longer actively denying problematic unconscious material, but rather engaging directly with it. Aaron is embarrassed while watching Joseph undress and get into the bathtub, but Joseph says, "It's okay, we're going to go to a lot deeper places than this." The film plays out like Aaron's internal dialogue with a part of himself he has refused to admit into consciousness. Absurd and downright creepy elements from a murky, uncharted space are glaringly revealed on the character of Joseph. Disrobing signals an honest confrontation with aspects of the self that have long been repressed. Soon after, Aaron stumbles upon the enormous peach fuzz wolf mask. Joseph claims that his dad created the mask and a song for kids that goes with it. Like, "Hello, my name is Peach Fuzz. I might look like I'll eat you up, but I'm as friendly as a rabbit, and I make a very good friend. I'm here and there's nothing to fear." The wolf mask tallies with the action that has taken place so far. Joseph is not dying. We're meant to believe that he's a serial killer, but my proposition is there's something else going on. The name Aaron in Hebrew means mountain of strength, and I think that the film Creep is a Freudian hero's journey from the tyranny of the ego's exalted sense of power into the spiraling, murky depths of the unconscious where fulfilling latent meaning can be achieved. I believe the song lyrics about Peach Fuzz being a good friend to be true in the psychoanalytic sense of pushing Aaron off of his ego's elevated tower and cracking open his tidy mindset to reach something profound. Before heading out, Joseph picks up identical-looking fur-trimmed hats for him and Aaron to wear and remarks, "Twinsies." Again, this tracks with how the film develops. Joseph hints at similarity with Aaron because they occupy the same psychic structure. The men search for the miracle waters of the heart, a healing body of water running beneath a heart-shaped rock formation. Apparently, only the pure of heart can be restored back to health by bathing in these waters. After startling Aaron on the trail, Joseph says, quote, "You need to see your face. All right, you're a little mad. I'm sorry. My God, that was incredible. You had a near-death experience. That's what it feels like when you feel like you're gonna die. It's incredible and powerful, isn't it? There was about 2 seconds after you were done being scared where it looked like you wanted to kill me. I don't take it personally. I think it was a visceral reaction. It's a defense thing. But there's an animal in you. There's a little peach fuzz inside you yet." End quote. The way Joseph continually pokes Aaron appears to me like provocations from an unacknowledged part of the mind, popping up bluntly to expose the hypocrisy of the ego. that doubles down in its denial of animal instincts. After a long time spent searching for the healing water, Aaron asks Joseph if he remembers how to get back, and Joseph responds that he doesn't. Aaron worries that they've taken a lot of forks in the road and switchbacks without keeping track, but Joseph replies, "That's back there, man. We've got to go forward. We can't find the miracle if we got a rope attached to us." I really love this line because it contains the magic of the promise of psychoanalysis. Joseph represents a certain kind of animating energy that compels the subject to move forward through the confusion. When Aaron, the so-called rational part of the mind, overthinks and frets about getting lost on the trail, Joseph reminds him that nothing transformative can occur in a condition of perfect security. This is the id's way of loosening the grip of the ego's perceived dominance over the mind. The men eventually find the heart-shaped rock. A potential cure for Joseph's cancer might be a red herring, because Aaron soaks himself in the water too. They leisurely rub the water on each other, and Joseph marks a nearby rock with their initials, A+J, with a heart around it. The scene resembles a fortifying ritual prior to embarking on the hardest part of the hero's journey, with the goal being to increase the strength of the heart, not the ego, before engaging in full-on psychological battle. Later, over whiskeys, Joseph tells Aaron that he needs to divulge something personal off camera before he dies. The screen goes dark, but the device continues to record audio. Joseph confesses that after finding animal pornography on his home computer's browser history, he confronted his wife, but she denied looking at that content. Her lie drove a wedge between them. Sometime later, Joseph wore a mask, snuck in, tied Angela up and proceeded to have ravenous animalistic sex with her, then left her still bound up and escaped through the window. Joseph admits to having raped his wife and claims that she never looked happier. The camera then turns back on and, with the video returned, Joseph acts like nothing happened. This perfectly captures the brutal honesty of the subject coming to terms with their primordial desire precisely at the moment when they believe that it is not being documented. Joseph confesses to longings that are loaded with societal taboo. He admits to acting on extreme animalistic urges. Moreover, the obscene yearnings appear to enliven the woman in the scenario too, reminding me of a line I once read that the unconscious reveals itself through dreams, jokes, slips of the tongue, symptoms, and browser history. Joseph's depraved confession is relayed from the glacial void of a black screen. He switches instantly back to civilized small talk as soon as he believes the camera has been turned on again. Horrified, Aaron tries to exit the house, but Joseph blocks the door while wearing the peach fuzz mask. Aaron says, quote, "Are you going to let me go? Why are you doing this to me? Are you just trying to scare me? Well, I'm terrified, okay? You won. Now will you just please step aside and let me go?" End quote. The scene is scary because we have no idea what Joseph intends to do. It feels dreadful in the familiar way of the rational conscious personality being cornered in a surreal dream state by volatile id impulses, not overly attacking but merely taunting the ego into an overwhelming sense of panic by virtue of being erratic. The situation leads to a scuffle that ends with Aaron getting away, but importantly, Aaron's exit is never shown on screen. Back at his home, Aaron starts receiving bizarre items in the mail, including a recording of Joseph digging a grave. Despite the fact that this has now become a stalking case, the police are not able to take action due to the lack of information about Joseph. Aaron dreams about the encounter at Heart Rock, in which he's a baby wearing a tiny wolf mask in a hot tub. Joseph wears the peach fuzz mask and pours wine over Aaron's head. There is blood in the water. I can't help but read the description of the dream as a morbid baptism in which Joseph assimilates Aaron into a united beating heart of the unconscious. The miracle of Heart Rock is to realize that the psyche is sustained by a force outside of the conscious personality. Awake, Aaron records his reaction to the unnerving dream and says, "I've got to stop thinking about this guy." But once the ego sees that it is not the master of its own house, it becomes tricky to continue the facade. The dread of the ego is to feel itself merging with the id. Aaron is called to dig a little deeper upon receiving another parcel. Joseph says that he loves wolves because they don't know how to express love and they're often very violent, murdering the things they love. He says that inside the wolf is a beautiful, misguided heart. He recalls the moment he scared Aaron in the woods when there was murder in his eyes, baby murder. Joseph says, quote, "You're not ready to accept that yet, but I want to encourage you to embrace your inner wolf. And more importantly, take the knife and don't be afraid to murder it. Because when you stick a knife in something and you gut it and you really dig inside, there's all this beautiful stuff. See you soon, buddy." End quote. Digging deeper sounds like a psychoanalytic mantra, and Freud used the metaphor of archaeology to describe his form of therapy. He referred to the talking cure as a procedure to clear away the pathogenic psychical material layer by layer, and compared it with the technique of excavating a buried city. The deeper you dig, the richer the narrative gets. Joseph calling Aaron Buddy is a full circle moment, as this is the name Aaron initially gave his unborn son. It tracks with Aaron's anxiety dream about being a baby bathed by Joseph and being initiated into an unconscious system. That Creep ends with Joseph hitting Aaron on the head with an axe represents an ego death, a complete loss of subjective self-identity, and a fundamental transformation of the psyche. It's like the Tower card in the tarot, widely associated with danger, catastrophe, and crisis, but also sudden change, higher learning, and liberation. The conscious personality is finally brought down a peg and made to see deeper dimensions of itself. The fact that all of this is captured on video makes me think of these characters as opposing parts of the filmmaking process and what is required in order to complete an artistic endeavor like cinema. Till next time.
Incredible stuff. A big thank you to the amazing Mary Wilde. And don't forget, if you want to hear more of Mary's perspectives, Mary's takes on genre cinema and other things, then sign up to her Patreon. Patreon.com/Mary Wilde. All right, Alex, we're going to wrap up shortly, but I've got to quickly ask you about the sequel, Creep 2, because I don't know about you, but I find that as soon as I finished watching Creep 1, I immediately kind of want to double bill it with Creep 2, because it's an excellent sequel, right? I think this is one of the great horror sequels. It kind of does what the first one does, but it fleshes it out a little bit more. It adds an extra dimension. And I actually think they work really well together as a little double bill, you know?
I was planning on doing that. And then I ran out of time, and so I haven't watched it again for the pod. But I remember really, really enjoying it, and it's one of those things that sort of treads the same beats, but examines it from a different angle. And it's almost like in this one, like I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but it's almost like he meets his match in this one, and it's someone who can sort of see him for who he is. So the bit we can say from the beginning is it's a female videographer this time who's a documentary maker and actually is also a director, right? In real life, the actor that portrays the documentary maker, and so she is used to making films with weirdos, essentially, and so she knows exactly how to handle him, and everything that he's trying is not cutting through. and you almost like wonder, have the tables turned? Like, is this who's really the victim here?
Yeah, it does make you go, who's the real creep in this one? I love it. I actually think that both films are great, but I think that the videographer character in this second one is way more interesting than Aaron in the first one, actually. Like, Sarah, she's excellent. Like, I literally just rewatched it because we recorded at like 8:30 p.m. tonight. I got to about 7 p.m. and I'd done everything I needed to do. And I was like, I've got 90 minutes to kill. I can stick on Creep 2 and watch the entirety of Creep 2 before we start recording.
Amazing.
And so I just finished watching it.
Maybe I'll watch it after this.
Yeah, pop it on. It's literally shorter than most Netflix series episodes these days.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really good. It's really good. And I think it plays on all of the stuff that we talked about the first one, about what it means to kind of form your own stories, to make movies, to film stuff. There's a lot more about that. I don't know if you remember, but there were a lot of conversations about like Francis Ford Coppola, and I want to be like Francis Ford Coppola, and I want to tell my own story the way I want to frame it and the way I want to tell it. And so there's a lot of that kind of side of it, but also just this kind of the weirdness of him butting up against the weirdness of her.
Yeah.
And how unfazed. There's like brilliant moments like when he tries to do the screaming jump scare and she's like, what are you doing? And, like complete opposite to Aaron.
I remember
it doesn't fall for it.
Yeah, I remember it being sort of like reflexive of the first one almost. And it's sort of almost commenting on all the parts of the first one.
Yes.
And recontextualizing them.
Exactly. Very meta. Very meta. Not completely unlike our favourites that we've talked about, Benson and Moorhead movies, right? In the way that these two films kind of like interweave and kind of almost respond to each other in that regard.
Yeah. I hadn't made that connection.
Yeah.
But that's a good one. Oh, I'm here for it.
Let's just go watch some more Benson and Moorhead movies again. But yeah, really fun. Like, genuinely both as fun and good as each other. And they're almost like they complete a little dual story almost. So it's almost like you could watch them both back to back,
Yeah, there has been off and on talk for a while of a Creep 3.
Right. Interesting.
So there's ambiguity, I believe, at the end of Creep 2.
Yes, there
but
is.
I wonder whether you could do, like, the thing about this is you could do a prequel, you could do it in between, you could do all sorts. Like, you just need to find the character, and another way of approaching it. Like, while we've been talking, I've just been unable to stop thinking about the sister.
Yeah.
Like, maybe that's Creep 3.
Oh.
Like, it's the two of them.
Yeah.
Like, what's that? Right, maybe she's part of it. If you're listening,
yeah,
Patrick.
Yeah, exactly.
Mark.
Patrick and Mark. Yeah.
Call me Bubby.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, no, I agree. And like, they can't be expensive to make these films, right? So like, I would be surprised if they had more ideas for it. I would be surprised if it didn't happen.
It's actually really surprising that they didn't just do a COVID one. Because they could easily have made it in COVID.
They almost feel like COVID movies, don't they, in a way? Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, there you go. That's it for our Hard Candy and Creep discussions. So much interesting stuff to talk about with these movies. I've loved it. Alex, thank you. And my final question for you, of course, is... what is your favourite home invasion movie?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask, and I forgot to decide. I forgot to choose one. I mean, there are so many good ones. I'm literally just scrolling through the episodes that you put out so far.
Oh yeah, do that, because there's some bangers.
But there are some absolute, and listen, there are ones I haven't seen. So like, I'm saving Lady in a Cage because you've raved about it so much. I really am excited to watch that for the first time. But
so good.
Like, there are some absolute bangers here. I would have to say, you've done us a disservice by making this so broad and exciting that it can encapsulate such gems as Sunset Boulevard, Misery, and shout out for People Under the Stairs as well, which I love.
Absolute banger.
Well, I'm going to say Sunset Boulevard, and again, I should watch that again. I've got it on DVD over there, and I haven't watched it in ages, so maybe I'll let myself watch that.
Well, I love I love that you're keen to watch Lady in a Cage, which is the one I've been recommending to everyone every week, but I will also recommend to you, Alex, specifically, because I know you're also a fan of that kind of like slightly more low-rent, brain rot-esque kind of a movie, right?
How dare you? Yes, no, it's true. It's a fair
When a Stranger Calls Back from 1992.
Oh, yeah, no, that's on the list as well. You're talking to Matt about that, weren't you?
Fucking brilliant. Absolutely fucking brilliant. Like, also has been one of my favourite new discoveries of this whole series. Like, genuinely great.
Awesome.
So check that out. I think you'll love it. Yeah.
Done.
Amazing. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining me. As always, it's such a joy. And until we next, meet on the chat rooms, let people know where they can find you out there online. Are you on Blue Sky, Threads?
I'm on
X,
Threads.
all the
Instagram, Threads, and Letterboxd. I've officially given up Twitter, X, whatever it's called now. It's gone. I'm done.
Good for you. Good for you.
It's a luxury that I have to not need it for anything anymore, and so I'm over there. So come find me on Threads, and we'll try and make that a thing.
Amazing.
Letterboxd, and also, Mike, we should say keep your eyes peeled, right? Just keep your eyes peeled. Later this year, maybe we might have some interesting things to talk about. Maybe soon. Who knows?
Alex and I might have some stuff to announce very soon. And when that time comes, Alex, we'll probably be doing some official announcements together on this very podcast, actually. So, yes, keep your eyes and ears.
Just leave that as a little tease.
Yeah, lovely little enigmatic tease there. I love it. Well, Alex, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a big thank you to this week's brilliant guest, Alex Ayling. So, let me know what you thought of this week's episode, what you thought of these movies and this discussion. I would love to hear your thoughts. What an interesting pair of films. I felt like there was probably so much more to discuss with each of these movies, so I would love to hear your thoughts. Please do get in touch. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, Letterboxd, etc. And if you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners, you can join the Evolution of Horror discussion group, or you can join the Evolution of Horror Discord. If you want to support this podcast financially and get treated to regular bonus content, then sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. There on Patreon, you will find a back catalogue of over 200 bonus episodes, so please do check it out. You can find this podcast in all the usual podcast places, and if you get a spare minute, I'd be so grateful if you could drop us a little rating and review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcast app you use, as that really helps us get discovered by new listeners. So, on to next week then, and I can't put it off anymore. It's time to discuss the most infamous home invasion film of all. Next week, I'm very excited to be joined by two brilliant brand new guests, Trace Thurman and Joe Lipsett from the Horror Queers podcast, and they are going to be joining me to discuss Brian Bettino's The Strangers from 2008 and its sequel, The Strangers Pray at Night, from 2018. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.